Good morning, Year 9. Welcome to our fifth poetry lesson. Yesterday we did a review of the first week, so hopefully that was useful to go back over the learning from week 1. This is a new learning today, a new text that we're going to look at, and this one is one of the poems that will be used or be reviewed again when you get into Year 10 and to Year 11, because it's one of the exam texts, so it's quite an important one, this one. But I hope you like it. I think it's one of my favourite ones in the collection that we'll be looking at. Right, let's get started. So, lesson objectives today: 1, to read an amazing poem. I hope you agree. 2, to understand the context of that poem. 3, to analyse how imagery and language create effect. And 4, to analyse how structure and form create effect. And I've put 3 and 4 in yellow and blue there, so that when you get to the questions at the end of the video, those questions are colour coded as well, so you can see which questions are language and which questions are structure, in case you weren't sure. So, who is William Wordsworth? William Wordsworth is possibly the most famous English Romantic poet. With his friend and fellow poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he helped to launch the Romantic age in English literature with their joint publication Lyrical Ballads in 1798. The collection contained The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and 3 other poems by Coleridge. William contributed 19 poems. There are 2 editions, the 1798 and the 1800. The 1800 edition has a second volume of poetry added to it. The idea of the poems was to use common language that could be read by everyone. Wordsworth believed that people were inherently good, but that society made people become corrupted. After the huge success of their first collection, Wordsworth and Coleridge became very famous and spent some time apart. In 1800, the pair reunited, and Coleridge lived in Keswick near to Grasmere, where Wordsworth was living. They once again spent a great deal of time together. Sadly, this period of happiness would end. Coleridge was addicted to opium, and his health was suffering. For medical reasons, in 1807, Coleridge moved to Italy, hoping the warm climate would improve his health. It meant Wordsworth couldn't see his best friend anymore. The only things to add there, really, about Wordsworth is that I've mentioned that he lived in Grasmere in 1800 as well. Before then, first of all, he was born in Cockermouth, and he spent a lot of his childhood in Penrith, where his grandparents lived, and he went to school in Penrith before going on to grammar school in Hawkshead, and then off to Cambridge University. So, if you didn't know anything about Wordsworth, he's a local Cumbrian lad who writes poems about the Cumbrian life that he sees. He loved fell walking, and although he went away from Cumbria and the Lake District, he chose to return here for much of his adult life after he was married. So yeah, he's a local celebrity, and it's well worth studying him. So here's a poem, A Complaint by William Wordsworth. There is a change, and I am poor. Your love hath been no long ago a fountain at my fond heart's door, whose only business was to flow, and flow it did, not taking heed of its own bounty or my need. What happy moments did I count! Blessed was I then, all bliss above. Now for that consecrated fount of murmuring, sparkling, living love, what have I? Shall I dare to tell? A comfortless and hidden well. A well of love, it may be deep, I trust it is, and never dry. What matter if the waters sleep in silence and obscurity? Such change, and at the very door of my fond heart, hath made me poor. So let's now have a look at the poem in closer detail. First line establishes that the life of the narrator has changed and it's got worse. Poor suggests that he's got less money, he's less well off. Whatever the change is, has taken something valuable away. When we look at the second line, we find out that it's about the love from another person. That's what's changed. And only recently, it says no long ago, only recently the situation was very different. And here, in the next 4 lines, that's lines 3, 4, 5, and 6, we get a description of what it used to be like for the narrator. He describes the relationship using a metaphor here, a water image, and it makes it sound like that the water was flowing and never ending, and it almost like feels like it's so positive and so perfect and lovely. Stanza 2 opens with a very positive line. What happy moments did I count, with an exclamation mark at the end, suggesting that there's like quite an emotional, happy line there, which is then doubled on the second line with another exclamation. And this one's got the word blessed and bliss, so it makes it sound like almost like a heavenly God's gift kind of idea about this relationship that the narrator was having. He also uses the word consecrated, which means, again, kind of holy. So there's like religious language in the second stanza, indicating how important this relationship has been to the narrator. He describes the water again, but he now describes it as murmuring, so that's kind of like that trickling sound that you get on a stream, sparkling with the sunlight reflecting off it, and living love. Alliteration there, just to emphasize that the water actually is a metaphor for the love between the narrator and this other person. The mood then switches. It's pretty much just past halfway through the poem when these two questions come in, which indicates a real change of tone. What have I? Shall I dare to tell? So the narrator is questioning what he's got left, what does he have now, and is he brave enough to actually kind of accept it and acknowledge it? And then he does. He tells us what he's got now. He describes it as a comfortless and hidden well. So very negative language here. Comfortless, so no comfort, very makes it very unhappy, and hidden, kind of secretive and far away, or not being able to see it anymore. So it's a really negative change at this point in stanza 2. The poet, the narrator, then focuses on this idea of a well, and he says, he describes it as a well of love. If you can hear the dog in the background, I apologise. A well of love there, and yeah, he says it may be deep, and he hopes it is. He trusts that it's deep, and it's never going to dry out. So the water image here has shifted into a new metaphor. Percy, shh, be good, be good. Sorry, guys. And another question: what matter if? So what matter? Sorry, he's kind of just saying, what's the difference? The love is still there, the water's still there, but I'm sure you'll notice there's a big difference in the two metaphors in how water behaves in these two different images. Here, for example, the water now is described as sleep, silence, and obscurity. Now, previously in stanza 2, the water was murmuring, sparkling, and living. So you can see there the difference in how the water is behaving between the kind of the first metaphor and the second. The end of the poem is again quite melancholy and quite depressing. Such change, and at the very door of my fond heart. The narrator brings us back to the idea of his fond heart. It was there in the first stanza as well, and it gives us a sense that the narrator is not heartbroken, but is certainly very upset at the change in the relationship, and a repetition of the first line in the last half of the last line may be poor. So creating a link between the end and the beginning, which as a consequence makes it feel like the situation is just never going to change. That's my really well drawn arrow. Look at that, isn't that a good arrow? Wow. Okay, so let's now get on to some questions, Year 9. So question 1. This poem was written sometime between 1806 and 1807. How do you think events in Wordsworth's life add meaning to the poem? So you might, if you'd made notes during the first part of the lesson, then you might remember what happened in 1807. If you didn't make notes or you've forgotten, then just whiz back to the first part of the video and notice what happened in 1807. And that'll really help you understand what's going on in this poem. 2. The poem uses two objects associated with water. Okay, so there's two answers to this one. Can you identify them? So basically, the answers here, what are the two objects that are associated with water in this poem? What is the difference between the way water is used by each object? So I think I mentioned this in the analysis of the poem. One of these objects, it has a range of descriptive words that kind of make it seem a particular character, where the other object has a different set of descriptive words which give it a completely different character. So just basically have a look at those different words that describe the two water objects. The water objects are metaphors. Look at your first answer. What do the water objects represent? So hopefully if you got your first answer right, by going back to the historical context of this poem, you will then be able to interpret what these metaphors mean. Okay, so it's a language question, which is why it's in a yellow highlight. So basically, what do the metaphors, this water, what does it mean? What does the first metaphor represent? And what does the second metaphor represent? Right, moving on to a kind of a structural focus now. This should be in blue, I apologise. What is the rhyme pattern? Now, if you remember, when you're describing a rhyme pattern, use letters A, B, C, D, etc., etc. And the way it works is you look at the first word and the first line, which is pour, and that becomes A. That pen is too thick to write with. That becomes A. And then if the second word, so the second line, last word, rhymes with pour, then that's also an A. But as you can see, it says a go. So that can't be an A, that becomes a B. Then you look at the third line, and the last word is door. Now, if door rhymes with anything that's gone before it, it picks up that sound. So door does rhyme with pour, so that means it's another A sound. And you work your way through the poem, going line by line, picking out the last word, and whether it's a new sound or it's repeating an old sound. And you do that for each stanza. So when there's a break in a stanza, you don't go on, you can go back to A again. And what you'll notice is the pattern here in the first stanza, and the pattern in the second stanza, and the pattern in the third stanza. If you get this right, you'll notice something about those three patterns. Okay. Question 6. How could the rhyme pattern also represent the story in the poem? This is a tricky question. Here, I'm asking you to think about how this rhyme pattern represents what's going on in the poem. And when you get the rhyme pattern in front of you, you'll see that there's some sounds that are separated and apart, and some sounds that are right close and next door to each other in a couplet. Try and interpret that range of different layouts of some sounds being apart and some sounds being close, and how that could represent the story in the poem. Question 7. The last line echoes the first line. What is the effect of this? Okay, so what's the effect of ending the poem with a repeat of something from the first line? How does that create an effect on the reader, or what meaning does it have? Okay, now so that is the end of today's lesson. Please take your time to go back over the video if you need to go back and look at any of the information that I've given you. I look forward to seeing your answers being uploaded onto Google Classroom, and I'll be doing another video lesson for tomorrow. Have a good day, take care, and as always, missing you a lot. See you soon.